You mentioned the idea of secret teachings versus the public teachings, and this seems to be something that we see in all religions, right? That there's the exoteric teachings for everyone at the congregation, and then the esoteric instructions for the initiates, the ones who are responsible enough or skilled enough to really have to go all the way, I guess, with their own personal experience. And so, do you think that's the division between the orthodox mainstream view was when the exoteric public teachings became formalized, and everything esoteric and to do with kind of initiation and these private or secret traditions were the ones that were ostracized?
Yes, just as you say, there's not a religion we can think of. I mean, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, that doesn't have a distinct recognition of a sort of elementary basic teaching. Usually it's about behavior, it's about what you do and what you don't do. It's about halakha in Judaism, it's about Torah. And then a deeper teaching, which has to do with dimensions of experience that go beyond that. And the secret gospels, see, at first we thought in graduate school, well, there are the good gospels and the bad ones. I mean, the bishop said, these are the true gospels, 4 gospels, now they're in the New Testament. These others are garbage, so just don't read them. They're bad for you, they'll lead you astray. But now we understand that, and it took a while figuring out, because these gospels had been so denounced, denigrated, censored, that my professor said at the time, we just thought these things were weird. Well, they are kind of weird, but we finally realized that they're not meant to be replacements of the stories in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're meant to be an advanced level that can be taught subsequently. But the bishop said, no, there's only this, there's no secret teaching, stop that. Because if you're an institutional leader, you can't control what people say Jesus taught secretly. I mean, you could make up something different and contrary to Catholic teaching. And so in Orthodox Christianity, whether Catholic or Protestant, if you're going to call yourself a mystic, like Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross, you better sound a lot like Orthodoxy, because you are in danger of the Inquisition. You're in danger of being called a heretic yourself.
I mean, as someone who really believes in the importance of direct mystical experience, I'm not inclined to dismiss them as just weird. As you say, some people are. But as I was reading the Gospel of Thomas, I was definitely struck by a kind of tone of strangeness. It felt kind of just certain passages seemed kind of odd. And at first I thought, well, this was maybe something special about these Gospels. But then I was reflecting on all of the passages I'm familiar with from a Christian upbringing, and just the sacrament, the body and blood of Christ, right? If you were to hear that with fresh ears, that sounds quite odd. That's not the kind of thing you hear in everyday life, right? So part of me was like, okay, maybe they're not particularly strange. It's just I'm hearing them with fresh ears, and we've got this sanitized version of it now, where we're all used to we're told what it represents and all this other stuff. But yeah, I think when people turn to these texts, they can be surprised by some of the strangeness there.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of strangeness in Christianity. But, I've been recently rereading the Gospel of Mark. It's one of my favorites. And, it's the shortest and the earliest one we have, and Matthew and Luke are based on it. And it looks like a simple narrative, but it's not. In fact, there was an extraordinary British critic, Frank Kermode, who wrote a book called The Sense of a Beginning about the Gospel of Mark. And he understood this looks like a naive text, just Jesus doing miracles, and it's strange, but it's actually very subtle, and many of the miracles described are metaphors for things that are hidden in the text, and even things that Jesus probably hid himself. So there's a lot more mystery and secrecy in the text we have than we ordinarily recognize. People think, oh, this is pretty forthright, Jesus does a miracle and he's obviously God. But traditions are not that simple.
Right. And you said that Mark was the earliest, but is there, I know there's a debate about how old the Gospel of Thomas is, but is there a possibility that it's even earlier than Mark?
We don't know, it's so hard to date any of these. We think not even that Mark was the earliest, because Luke said many people were writing about Jesus at the time, but it's the earliest narrative that survives, right? And it's written maybe 40 or 50 years after the death of Jesus. So when I was in graduate school, my professor thought, well, the earliest memories of Jesus wouldn't so much be stories and narrative, it would be sayings. Like Jesus said, the parable of the mustard seed, or that Jesus told the story of a treasure hidden in the field. These are little, they call them pericopes, meaning a sort of a little piece of the teaching. And so to find a text that was just sayings, that's what scholars always assumed would have been the earliest, that there would be lists of the sayings of Jesus. And that's what most scholars assume were the earliest written sources. So to find a source that was nothing but sayings struck him as possibly earlier. We don't know, though, because it seems to me that we have evidence that the Gospel of Thomas is written, at least it had been written by the time, the end of the first century, by the time, say, the Gospel of John had been written, or maybe earlier, but we don't know. Scholars who really don't like this material, and I can mention a prominent scholar at Cambridge University who has written massive commentaries on the Gospel of Thomas to prove how derivative it is and how insignificant. It's all dependent on the other Gospels. And people who say that, this is Simon Gathercole at Cambridge University, people who say that will always say, well, and also, of course, the Gospel of Thomas is written very late, because the actual texts we have that were found in Upper Egypt were written in the 3rd and 4th century. Well, totally irrelevant, because what we have, the texts, are papyrus copies in Coptic, ancient Egyptian, of what was a Greek source written far earlier, and we have pieces, fragments of the Greek source that were found in Oxyrhynchus in Upper Egypt in garbage dumps, along where you can also find fragments of the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Mark. So it looks really quite early, but we don't know the dates, and that doesn't really guarantee much anyway. But the important thing, I think, is that scholars really divide on this. Some, like me, find it say, wait, this really expands our perspective on the early Christian movement, and it explains a lot of things that we had no clue about. And others, like Gathercole, will say, oh, secondary derivative, ignore this stuff. All we really should care about is what the Orthodox Church endorses. And Orthodox, in Greek means straight thinking. So they have the straight thinking Gospels, or so they claim.